Hi, Joel. Glad to meet you here in Tom Carpenter's house, and I want to ask you some questions about your becoming one of the first artists I was glad to see in the first book on copy art. And my question will be, how did you come to use the old Xerox equipment for creating art?
Okay, today's October 1st, 2022. When I was still in college, I sort of always did alternative kind of things. I remember doing multiple images when I was younger, multiple exposures on the same piece of film, things like that. And I did other kinds of alternative kind of imagery. And then I started using, when the copy machines came out, I had access. I worked at Eastman House. I had access to a 914. They had a Kodak version of a copy machine that was a wet process. You remember what that was called, Klaus? I forgot.
Yeah, it's a Verifax.
Verifax. Verifax. Okay,
Yeah.
there's that, and then later there was a 3M made a version that used heat instead of a liquid chemical.
Yeah.
So I played around with that. And then working at Eastman House, I think that's where I first discovered the Model D equipment. They had a couple of big books that were written. One was called Electrophotography and one was called Xerography. And there was a picture of the Model D and the number 4 camera, etc. So I don't remember how some of the details, but eventually I found, well, first of all, in Rochester, New York, where I lived, was the home of Xerox, so it was really easy to find the equipment. And eventually I found a warehouse. I was told to go there by people that I knew, and there was a whole mountain pile of number 4 cameras, processors, all the works. Trays came there. And then I met, I don't remember when, how, Mr. Robert Gunlocks, who worked as a scientist at Xerox, and he sort of became a mentor. He helped me get things that I needed: trays, plates, toner, which I've accrued and came along with. And how I worked with the process was I used it as a camera to copy my own photographs. So the number 4 camera has a platen on the front. I would put my photographs there, excuse me, and I would photograph them, put them on a paper that I could write and draw on. That was my whole idea to do this, was so that I could augment the image. I didn't think about writing on the silver photograph, which has been done. So I put on a piece of art paper, Reeves or Arches artist paper. I transferred it to there first on the plate, cleaning it up, and then I would augment it. I would write on it. I would draw on it. That was my earlier works. When I used the copy machines, it was basically doing like cutting up pictures and putting them down, little collages and that kind of thing from found work. But when I used the Haloid equipment, the Xerox equipment, it was my own photographs that became that way. And over time, I cut out objects, buildings, people, made little things that I could move around, so I could create again these little stories. You probably have some of those.
I saw it in the book, I believe, yeah.
Okay, so I did a lot of that. So I did that from the late 70s until the middle of 1995 or so, maybe 97, I think. Eventually I discovered digital photography, and I moved away from the xerography. But I worked for all those years. That was my work. Going out with the camera, gathering the photographs, portraits of people or whatever they were, assembling them, writing on them, printing on them, using the electrostatic process to image copper-clad, copper-covered plastic plates. The image became the picture that was etched, and then printed them. I also put them on paper plates and did offset, used it as an offset imager. Experimented with putting pictures on porcelain tiles, fusing them there. A lot of things were just sort of experiments. My main work was still the digital or the electrostatic image on paper.
Yeah.
That's really what, is the thing that flows through, and then I tried other kinds of things with it. And I used to go around and help people get their machines together, help them find equipment. I met Tom, and he became a sort of like a person that I passed down my knowledge. But he's also very technically minded, so it was easy for him to pick up on it. And so he continues it. He uses it as a camera. I used it as a camera a little bit, a couple of different ways. Around the house, I photographed myself, my son, my wife. I did a little bit of that. I never thought of it as a camera to go out and use as an imaging tool directly. For me, it was an intermediary tool.
I understand, yeah.
I did, yeah.
So you did several different kind of series. One that I first saw was you photographed a video monitor.
Yes.
And then you did a series where you wrote text on the images, and then the one that is like mind-blowing, kind of when you think of when you did it, were those ones that are where you photographed photographs but then transferred them onto another piece of paper. So if you were to look at them today, you would think they were done in Photoshop, but they're incredibly complicated. Like there's a human figure, there's buildings, and there's like a foreground.
Right.
So now that would all be done in Photoshop, but you were doing that pre-computers and not in a darkroom. Can you talk about those ones?
Sure. That's where I had a whole box full. I photographed people on the street and had all these negatives, and so I made prints, cut them out, all different single people, multiple people, cut them out, had a box full of them. I did the same thing with cityscapes, cut out buildings and whatnot, had a bunch of those, and then I would put them together. Sometimes I would print two colors, a black and a red. Those are the two colors I used. So you made two different exposures, two different transfers, placed them where I wanted them, etc. So I did that. Then I used a video camera with video film, a film video camera, not film I should say, but tape. And went around and did pictures of that. People that I knew, people I didn't know, went to different events. And I had a VDT terminal, computer terminal, but a video display terminal. So with the tube, I set that on the platen of the Xerox camera, and then froze the image on the camera, could freeze it with there was no distortion, the image just stopped. So here's a stopped image on the VDT. And then with an 8 or 9 or second exposure, I would take a picture of the frame with the Xerox camera, use brown toner, and the image included the shape of the screen, that sort of rounded corner screen. And I made prints like that, highly toned, so they had like a very velvety kind of a feel to them. And then for about 7 years, I put together an old wooden portrait camera, and changed the back so it would take the Xerox plate in a ground glass, and took this wooden camera, had a box built that I could mount the Model D processor in, and a fusing tray or fuming fuser, and I had an electronic flash. So I went out to arts and craft shows, and I took about 12,000 portraits of people, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, all over. $1, then it went to $2, and at the end it was $3. I had a little A board with a picture on it. And people would stand in line. I'd go to Buffalo to a big art show there. People would stand in line from when I showed up at 11 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. And I just did one after the other, after the other, after the other. And they keep coming back to me. People keep telling me, I still have that picture. I remember you photographed me and my child. 12,000 electric static pictures, brown toner, brown paper, and a flat craft paper bag. And that's what they went away with. The first year or two, it was a timer, because I didn't have the electronic flash. And so it would take 8 or 9 or 10 seconds. I would always set up with there was some like So that was interesting.
Yeah.
So, you know, and electronic flash was nice, but sometimes you'd have to take it twice because the people would close their eyes. So there were different ways that I could use it. So that's really was the only way that I went out with it. But I didn't go other places because it was a whole deal. I had a vehicle that I could roll this cart up on and into the back of it. So I had everything together and then move it around that way. The camera actually was on the box. That was the tripod, this wooden box that had compartments in it for the different things that I needed. And to power it, I had a device that ran off of a battery, somewhat like an inverter, but it would take the 12-volt battery and create 110 volts. So it would power the camera, the processor, and it would power the electronic flash.
Wow. Yeah.
Has me some more anything else.
That's really great. What I wanted to ask you first, Joel, when did you start it? Because I saw your artwork in the copy art book from 1978, and I believe you started much earlier.
I started a little bit earlier, but probably none of that work really was out there. It was all my developmental kind of work. But 75, 76, and looking back, I see images that are that dated. Yeah. Yes, and then I went to school, the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, and so we had 2 or 3 of those cameras that maintained. People asked me questions, I'd answer the questions on the phone, try to help them get their devices cleaned up and working. And then I came up with an idea to extend the electrostatic charge outside the camera. We called it a hot wire. And Mr. Gunlock helped me with that, so I went to the high power output, put a big resistor on it, so we kept the voltage, or we kept the amperage down, so it was milliamps, so you wouldn't kill yourself, because it's the amperage that really does you in. So it was relatively safe. If you got zapped by it, you'd get a little tingly shock, but it wouldn't be anything bad. So with this wire, an insulated wire with a regular pin soldered onto it and taped, you would turn it on to a plus or a minus, and you would spray the wire, spraying the charge out, and to push it down like a minus or a plus charge, whatever, and it would push it. The paper, you put it onto a piece of tissue paper, carbon transcript, and put it onto an image, and you could onto a bigger piece of paper, and you could transfer it and then peel it off, and there would be the image.
That's what Tom uses all the time, I believe, yeah?
Yeah, for some of his bigger pictures, and Joan Lyons is one who did some very creative work. Made 30 by 40 prints by taking 4 images and of an object in parts, and then put them down on a big piece of paper.
Yeah.
You can see the marking, but still you can see this big electrostatic image.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Charlie Arnold, who was the #1 in the area of copy art using the Xerox equipment, using the Model D processor #4, and I was like #2, I guess. But there were copy arts before. People, when copy machines started coming out, people started to engaging in cutting and pasting and doing stuff like that. But this was different. Charlie Arnold set up little scenes in front of his camera and photographed these things.
Yeah.
And no one really has ever done anything quite like that. Tom does a lot of the work, but he does it in his style. It's a little bit different.
That's right.
Charlie Arnold. And me, I mostly was interested in the images that I could find and use to create with. So I was a little bit different that way.
Yeah, you had your own style.
Yes,
of course,
yeah.
yeah.
Style, yeah.
Your own handwriting.
Yes, it's a perfect thing for taking around. And Tom has a camera over there. You can see that Charlie Arnold used. He's now in the process of creating an even smaller one, so you can haul it around. You just have to have a Model D processor, which isn't too bad. You can run that off an inverter. And you have a van. You can take the processor with you and go out and about.
Well,
and you can use any lens.
Yeah.
That works.
Oh yeah, my dear. Okay, we'll take a short break.
Yes.
I think this camera.